All right, the doors are closed. Welcome. Welcome to a web for anyone, anywhere, anytime. I want to introduce to some cat friends of mine. This is our beloved Ozzy, who isn't there anymore, but he was a one-eyed cat. He had his problems. For instance, this is Dimka. She is from Russia, had frostbite, lost her legs, ears and tail. Might know Grumpy Cat from the internet, who had feline dwarfism. Monty, who's missing a nasal bridge. Little Bob, also famous from the internet, also had dwarfism. Scooter, who's partially paralyzed and had some support there. And what about T-Rex, who lost his legs probably from a weed whacker when it was a little kitten. And Pico has glaucoma. And you wonder, what is he talking about, all these cats? Well, these cats resonate also with us as human beings. We also have our problems, disabilities, challenges, and we try to accommodate to that, right? Special lanes for wheelchairs and stuff like that. But we don't do that on the internet, on the website. So I want to talk to you about that. Hi, my name is Rowdy. Personally, I'm a cat dad of 5. I live in the city of Gouda in the Netherlands. You probably know it from the cheese. I arrived this morning after 16,536 kilometers of flying. Great to be here. First time below the equator as well. And in my day-to-day life, I'm a front-end focused senior DevOps engineer with special attention for accessibility. I try to add another word every week if I can. All right, accessibility. It's a really hard word to write and to pronounce, so we usually call it ALI. A numeronym to make things easier, like internationalization, which is I18N, W3C for the World Wide Web Consortium, or if you're from the States, K9s for dogs. All the rules and guidelines for accessibility are written down in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And essentially it is how to make web content more accessible for, well, people with disabilities, but for people in general, actually. It has 4 principles. Perceivable is one of them. People must be able to find your content. It shouldn't be a scavenge hunt. It needs to be operable, so people need to be able to use it now and in the future. It needs to be understandable. Right, you want to sell them something or want to explain them something, it makes sense, right? It shouldn't be all gibberish for them. And it needs to be robust. So that means it needs to run in different technologies. Think about browsers, but also about future things. So keep that in mind. And these 4 principles are called POUR. They have 13 guidelines with 78 success criteria. I'm not going to go over them all because we'll probably be here till the end of the night then. But I take some of them that are really important. You can find them on the first link, but if you want to look at it, you would prefer the second one because that's more easy to read. All right, let's talk about robust. As I said, it should run in different browsers. Fortunately, since June 15, we can say goodbye to IE11. Very happy about that, but it should run in all current browsers, but also in future browsers. It needs to run on all kinds of devices. That could be, well, your smartphone, or maybe your car, or your smart TV. But it's not only that running your website there or your application, it needs to work with screen readers for people who are blind or have bad vision. So, for instance, on Safari, we have VoiceOver. We have the free version for Windows screen reader called NVDA that works best with Firefox. And JAWS is a paid product that works best with Chrome on Windows. People can have a lot of different challenges and ways to deal with that. Maybe you are in a way disabled that you only can use a sip and puff, for instance, to control the websites or other things in your life, or mouse sticks, or you need a screen magnifier, or even if you're severely limited, you could move around the web with eye tracking, for instance. Do you remember these technologies? They didn't turn out to be that future-proof, so keep that in mind. We had Java applets, I've built them, they were horrific. We had Real Player. We had Adobe Air, that would be the thing for building applications. Silverlight and Flash as well. So these are technologies that were not that accessible to begin with and also disappeared already. The thing you should count on is semantic HTML. HTML for everything. HTML rules the world. Because it worked when it was created in the early 90s. It's still working today. You can visit websites from that were built in the 90s and still would work in a modern browser. And it will probably continue to work in the future as well. So let's look at some things that are really important in that way. For instance, headings. If you know HTML, you know we have H1 till H6. For a screen reader user, if they use the software, it will pop up a menu like this. On Safari with VoiceOver, this is called a rotor. And they can move around using the arrow keys through the headings and see, oh, this is interesting, let's go there. So make sure that your headings are appropriate in your website. I would still say only use one level 1 per page, because that's the most important thing about your page. But also don't skip any heading levels. It's really weird for a screen reader to go from H1 to H4, for instance. And please, the last one, don't use heading for styling purposes. I've seen designers saying, well, this should be this big, so it should be in H1. Well, no, it should be a heading, but what level it is, you as a developer decide and take this in account that it should be in natural order. Just use a class if it needs to be bigger or bolder or whatever. Also, with HTML5, 10 years ago already, we got sectioning elements. Not everything is a div. So if you use this like a header with 2 navigation items in it, a main and a side, and a footer with again a navigation, in the rotor it will look like this. We have landmarks there. The user can scroll into landmarks. But it's not really useful, right? We have banner, that's the header, but we have navigation, and the last one is navigation again. That doesn't really make sense. So for these kind of views, we can use something called area. I will come back to later, but if we set this, area label main, area label breadcrumbs, and area label secondary, you can see in the rotor now it's more explicit what kind of navigation it is. And this, what is this? Is this a link or a button? Does anybody know? It depends, right? Like everything in computer science. Please, if it is a link to just another page, use a link, use an A. If it does something on your page, submit something, does a calculation or whatever, then you are allowed to use a button. And what I've seen a lot in last years, especially with the new frameworks that are there, is people thinking, well, you know, you have that button, but I can do better. I can create my own button. So let's see how that works out then for you. Let's say you have a form with a label for email, an input for that email address. And then you decide to use, well, the almighty div to create a button. So we give it a class of button for styling purposes. But as you can see, you're not done then. Because it needs to listen to a click event, otherwise the div doesn't do anything. So you add an event listener to the click event for that button, that so-called button. Then you need to submit the form, right? So you need to have a method for that as well. Well, you can do that by selecting the form and doing submit. All right? Well, you have keyboard users, right? And also for screen readers, you need to be able to go there. So it needs to have a tab index of 0 to get at a position in the natural flow of the website. And it needs to be accessible as well. The screen reader doesn't know that this div is now a button, so you need to add a role of button there. And it needs to work with a keyboard even more, right? You need to be able to hit enter to submit the form and not have to use your mouse to click it. So you need to add some extra code there as well. Well, there is your fancy div button. But what if you did it like this? Just use a button. You can still style it. And because it's the only button in this form, it's automatically the submit button. So you don't have to give it a type of submit, for instance. Keep it simple. I said a little bit about ARIA, like the ARIA label, and the role is also an ARIA part. And ARIA stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications. It's a weird acronym for me. It means that you can use attributes on your HTML code to give them more meaning, more actions. But keep in mind that the first rule of ARIA is don't use ARIA. If you can do better with just using the native HTML elements or use attributes, for instance, to do stuff, please do that. The second rule of ARIA is don't change the native HTML semantics. I now use the span to create a button, but it's the same like I told you for the div. It doesn't make sense. Just use a button. We have the third rule, that if you create your own button, in this case, my very, very special button, that's a component, I don't know, in React Vue or whatever, or a web component, make sure you add it to the natural flow of the page so it can have keyboard access. So in this case, add tab index again. And to explain you, if you add 0, well, as I said, it comes into the natural order of the page. -1 will remove it, so it's not accessible through a keyboard or whatever. You should only do that if you want to make sure it can only be done by JavaScript, for instance. I don't see many reasons for it, but I wouldn't recommend it. And especially the last one, if you use a number higher than 0, you're essentially saying, well, this is the most important thing, so it will go there first instead of going through the natural flow. So if you're tapping around, it's like tap, go there, and then you go back, for instance. So that's a really, really weird experience. So if you look at colors, green is okay, orange, meh, red, I'll hunt you. And the fourth rule we have is that we can give elements a presentation, say a presentation rule. So it's just something extra. It's not really necessary. It's not vital for the web page. So you can add role presentation or area hidden to true. But if you do it like this, then the buttons are never going to be reached by a keyboard or even spoken out by a screen reader. And to go further, we have a fifth rule. Make sure that every interactive element has a name. Because again, the screen reader wants to read out what it is. So if you do the first thing, it will just say, well, it's an input. I don't know what to put here, but it's an input. Figure it out. So a better thing is to, for instance, add an area label saying search. And I have some examples for a screen reader how things sound like that, but it will read out something like input search or search input. Or even the better one, I would say, is add always a label to an input field. And then the screen reader will know this is connected and will read it out like that. All right, you saw area label. But let's start at the basics. Use descriptive labels for any element you're using. So a link that says read more, and maybe you have those on your homepage with 20 links, read more. Yeah, read more what? I don't know what you're meaning. So you're could use area label there again, so it will not read out read more, it will read out read more about famous cats. Or I would say it's even better, use the last one. Just have the link say, if you really, really want it and your space limit said read more, okay. For our visual people, we can see that. But add a little span with a clause there that's only spoken out through screen readers. So in this case, the screen reader will say, well, read more about famous cats. We as visual people will say, see, read more. But it has another benefit as well. Google search will love this because it now knows what this link is about. Because Google will read the link in its whole. And you saw the other only clause there. This is kind of boilerplate everybody use to make sure that it's, say, visible for screen reader, but not visible for people that are viewing your website. Another thing we have is we do a lot of single page applications, right? And we change data that's coming in. If we don't use something called a region, blind users don't know what's going on. You will update the screen, but it stays quiet on their side. So there are two ways to do this. You either can use the polite way, that will wait until the user is finished with maybe reading through the page, tapping around when it has the time to intervene, or the area live assertive that just comes in like a hammer saying, this is the most important thing. And I have an example of that. You're also going to hear the first time the screen reader doing his thing. So I'm tapping around, and at some moment, I will hit search.
Voiceover on Safari. Status message. Heading level 1, refuse to drink water except out of someone's glass, main. You are currently on a heading level 1, human. Content selected, edit text. You are currently on a text field. To enter text in this field, type search button. You are currently on a button. To click this button, press Control, Option, Space.
So I'm going to hit this button, but meanwhile, I'll skip to the paragraph to read that
whenever
out.
A door is opened, Russian. Search results. 2 items found. 1. Yum, lick human with sandpaper tongue. 2. Wake up human for food at 4 a.m.
So you can see, while it was reading out the paragraph, it just intervened like say, oh, I have search results now for you. So that's the assertive way. And you can imagine that the polite way would have read out the paragraph first and then intervene. Okay, ARIA has a lot of role states and properties. We're not gonna go through all of them, but just to get a reference what's out there, I'm gonna show a few later on. These are all the ARIA ones, like the labeled by we already saw. So let's go one by one. You can use ARIA label. And ARIA label will override the name that the element has. So in this case, it's an X, right? And replacing it with text that you yourself put there. So if you listen to this one, this could be like in a model to close it, right? So you have a button with X, and it will read out like this.
Times button.
Times button. Well, if you add an ARIA label of close, then it will say
close button.
Close button. That makes more sense, right? ARIA labeled by means that you can refer to some other part in your page, for instance, to set that name. In this case, I'm using a section, and that section can be used in the landmarks that I showed you earlier in the rotor. Then you can select where you want to go. But it doesn't make sense to say, well, I add an ARIA label here and give it a name of famous internet cats or whatever. I now just refer to the heading that's already there, and it will read out like this.
Landmarks menu. Famous internet cats region.
So you're hearing that it's the landmarks and it's the region of famous internet cats. So you can go there if you want to. A very nice one, I would say, is this one, the area described by. It will give you extra information. So for instance, if you have this form and you need to enter a username, if you are cited, you can see that it says, well, a username must be between X and Y characters, and it may contain any character you want in that case. But a screen reader will read out this.
Username, edit text with autofill menu.
And you don't know anything about the limitations. So maybe a blind user will start typing in a username and will submit it and say, well, wrong. So you can be more polite up front by adding area described by. So what you do there is you refer to IDs that are already there. So in this case, length and format. And then it will sound like this.
Username, edit text with autofill menu. Username must be 6 to 15 characters. Username may contain alphanumeric characters.
So you hear it takes a little pause between saying, well, this is an input for username, and then it will say what are the restrictions there. If we throw this together like this, we have an H1 that says element. It has an area label of H1 with area label. Area labeled by is referred to as H1 with area labeled by, and we have a described by. And I will show you in a bit. It will generate an accessibility tree. Like you have a DOM tree, for instance, you also have an accessibility tree where you can see what things are called and how it's used. Any idea what will be spoken here if we run this? Anybody fancy a guess? All right. Well, let's listen.
Heading level 1, H1 with aria labeled B. H1 with aria described B.
All right, the pronunciation is a little bit weird, but it will say heading level 1, and then uses the labeled by, because that's more important than area label, and that's more important than element. But the described by is always extra, so it will say area labeled by, and then area described by as well. And if you go to your DevTools, to the accessibility tab, you can see that the name is H1 with area labeled by, but there's also a description that is being used. All right, let's go to another section about perceivable. People must be able to find your content. Well, that would be nice, right? But we make it really hard for people. What about the use of color, for instance? We rely on it too much. So if you have daltonism or color blindness, and maybe you have the red-green color blindness that a lot of men have, or you have monochromacy, you can only see things in 50 shades of gray. What colors are these? I have no idea. I have inputs here, but is the first one, is that wrong or okay? And the second one, you have no idea. So please, just help people, just add a little icon, for instance. It doesn't have to be, have an extra meaning or something, but it gives a clear indication what's going on there. So the first one apparently was wrong, and the second one is correct, even though they're both blank. My favorite one, color contrast. I'm getting a little older, fortunately. And for me, font sizes and contrast is getting harder and harder. You need to be sure that it's good. There is a yearly study from WebAIM, and they look at the 1 million most popular websites and do accessibility tests on it. And on almost 84% of those websites, color contrast was bad. And we are to blame, everybody. What is color contrast? How is it calculated? Well, it goes from 1 to 21, and usually you can see it in your DevTools like 1, 1 or 21, 1. And these are the rules. Say normal text should have a minimum ratio of 4.5 to 1, and large text or bold text should have a minimum of 3 to 1. And large means 18 points, or around 24 pixels, And bold text, if you have, it should at least be about 18.5 pixels. And to calculate this, you can do it yourself. It's pretty simple. L1 is the relative luminance of the lighter of the two colors, and L2 is the relative luminance of the darker of the colors. And what is luminance? Well, to 0, it's darkest, and the further you go to 1, it's lightest. So far, so good, right? So blink with your eyes, and you get this to calculate it. This is not something you want to do yourself, right? So fortunately, we have color contrast checkers. You have them in many variations, separate programs, or this one I like to use the most is just in your DevTools, it's there. And it will tell you how good or bad the contrast is. In this case, it's 363, so that's fine. And it's based on a level called AA. That's applicable to most common websites. If you go to AAA, then it's very specialized. For the web, you can look at AA figures. So this is good. But let's look at another one, or let's look at a website that's not that good. And I'm ashamed to say it's from the company I work for. This is still okay. But if you go to lighter orange, here we have a problem. It's too light with the white background. If you go to the button, it's orange button with white text. That's not good either. And the same if you reverse it, still the same problem. And if you go to the menu up top, you can see, well, that's not good either. Light gray on gray. Unfortunately, orange is our company color, so we need to come up with some solutions there. It's not only contrast ratio like the front and the back end color. What about text shadows? Keep that in mind as well. Or outline text. Or text on images. That's the worst. Orientation. I saw a few examples, and I don't know how you can do this. Because you're saying, well, user, you have to use your device in this way. You have to use it portrait or landscape. Maybe it's mounted on something, and you cannot rotate it. Or maybe you have a laptop, and you can rotate it, but the screen don't rotate, right? So I've seen these code examples, like if it's, let's see, if it's in landscape, if your device is a landscape, like a laptop, you should rotate it to see my content. Well, that doesn't really make sense, right? On a phone, okay, you can do it, but it's still pushing you. Or even this one, if it's in portrait mode, so if you're holding your phone in your hand like you normally do, it will rotate the text for you. Then you have to still look like that. So please don't do that. We all use images on the web, right? But if you're not sighted, you cannot see what that image is about. But it can still give some extra meaning to the story you're trying to tell. So you should use a suitable alternative text for that. And the same study shows that over half of the websites still don't do that, of the 1 million most popular websites. So if you look at this image, especially I love the image name. That usually you get that like people are throwing something in the CMS or something like that. Well, screen reader will read it out like this.
MG 9370-1 JPG image.
Yeah, thank you. That makes sense. Please do things like this. Add an alternative text. And it's not an alternative text that needs to be, I don't know, maximum of 2 words or 10 words. But just describe the situation, because if you can't see it, you can still create a picture in your head, right? So
a red cat lying on the kitchen counter with a brown bag over his head. The bag has holes for the eyes and snout and make the cat look like a bank robber image.
And now you know what it is about, right? If you look at a picture like this, and this is just
a red cat.
Oh, no, it has the code already on it. this could serve like a nice background image, right? Maybe in a header or on a different page, different place on your website. But it doesn't really add a lot to the story. It's just nice to see. Looking at 4 of my cats. So you can add an alt text there and you leave it blank. So the screen reader will not read it out. Bless you. But maybe you can do it even in a better way. Just use it as a background image of that element. So it's not in your code as well. Okay, captions. I'm not a native English speaker, so captions are really relevant for me as well, and subtitles. But of course, it's not only me, it's especially people that cannot hear will benefit from that. And you might think, well, don't watch, maybe those people don't watch a film or a TV series. Of course they do, but they need a little extra help. As I mentioned, subtitles, those are translations for people like me who are not native English speakers. We have closed captions with the symbol that you see on top. And that's not only showing what's being said, but also gives you more information about what's going on. Maybe a sound or music or something else is happening there. I have an example of that to show you. And we have also something called open captions, and it's really confusing closed and open for me, because open captions are the same as closed captions, but they're burnt into the video itself, and you cannot turn them on or off. And in my mind, that's closed and not open, but hey, I didn't write the specs. So let's look at this piece of video. This is from one of my favorite series called blank. Yeah, it's the train that goes around the world when it's really cold in the future. Snowpiercer, thank you very much. Jet-lag brain. So let's have a look. Oh yeah, and I've turned off the audio, of course. So there's music going on, or something like a sound. You can see alarms are bleeping. Okay, okay. They're curious what's going on. Are you there? Probably some eerie music. And signal breaking. Okay, they're trying to reach him. And there's some crackling. And he's in pain, apparently. So even though you're not hearing it, you can still get a picture, right? What's going on there. So that's the purpose of closed captioning. The other way around, if you're blind, you don't watch movies, right? And you don't watch TV series. Oh yeah, they do. But they're using audio descriptions for that. And if you're putting videos out on YouTube, for instance, if you want to be inclusive and have a good feeling about yourself, but also helping other people, make sure you have audio descriptions as well on your video. So let's listen to, because we're blind now, imagine that, listen to a video how it's originally. Any idea? Sorry? You're not allowed to say anything anymore. But here's it with audio description.
Scrat scurries over a large sheet of ice. He spies his acorn under it. He tries to get to it, whacking his nose against the ice. The ice breaks, Scrat falls in, and the acorn bounces out.
So it gives you a clear picture, right, of what's going on here, without the audio description. So audio descriptions make it easy for people that are blind just to get, again, an image of what's going on. Okay, let's move on to another criteria called operable. People need to be able to use your website. Well, that makes sense, right? Oh, we messed it up quite a lot as well. By default, we have a focus indicator on our websites. The browser supports that, or gives that to you if you're tapping around. But most of our designers think it's ugly. Please remove it. Well, don't. This is how a default focus indicator looks like, for instance. So you're tapping around and you can see, oh, I'm on this link. I can move around in this radio group, have a button and an input. Well, then you have those designs, well, hey, that's ugly. Let's remove it. Well, let's see if we can follow around where we are now. I think the video is running. Oh, there it is. That's the only part we can see where we are. So this is really, really, really bad. Don't do this. Make it a little bit nicer if you want to. I'm not sure if this is nicer, but this is a way. I can do things like this. Or just deal with it with the default way we're doing it. So, okay, I allow you to do this. But in return, you need to do things like this. Make sure that it's still visible where you are when you're tabbing around. Talking about tabbing, the order is very important. It's weird if things move around if you're tapping around, right? Let's look at this example. This is from a Dutch news website. On the orange box, you can see, well, maybe you can see some URLs, but something weird is going on. And I must say, their focus style, if you look in the top bar, if I run the video, the focus style is very bad as well. So let's see where we are. We are now at Algemeen, Economie. You can see it's really hard to see. There's a gray background, Media and Culture. Go to Shop, and then I think I go to Meer, that's more, and then, no. Well, let's just hit Enter. Okay, it opens the menu. Let's continue tabbing. You can see different URLs are coming there. But I don't see anything here. Apparently, I'm now behind the menu tabbing on a submenu that's there. And only now I'm there, and their focus styles are not that great, right? So please keep in mind, if you do something like this, a drop-down menu, give it focus when you're opening it. Because otherwise you have no idea where you are. So I created an accessible drop-down menu myself. It's available on GitHub. At the end, I will share a link as well where everything is there. So you can have a look later on if you want to. And it looks something like this. So I can tab around. It has clear focus styles. If I hit Enter and tab, I come into the submenus clearly to see where I am. And also, if I hit Escape, it will close down all submenus that are open at that point. And you go forth and backwards, of course, with the tabbing. So if you're interested, have a look. One easy thing to do, which helps a lot of users, is make sure they can skip directly from the menu to the content. So if they're using the tab, they don't need to tab through all your headings, your menus, and all the important stuff you have up there. So let's look at this. If I would have to tab here, I'm going to the logo because that's a link to a homepage, to the search, to the menu. But all I want to do is this. I get an extra, if I tap, I get an extra option, and then I hit Enter and directly go to my main content. And that is really, really easy to do. I add an extra link there, which refers to the ID of my main in this case. And I give it a class of skip link because I need to style it. First of all, that's not visible in the beginning, but when it's visible, it needs to look nice as well. So styling could be something like this, but the most important thing I did here is that I first hide it with the translate Y. And if it gets focused, so if you tap on it, it's the first link on the website. If you tap on it, then it will transform back and be visible. All right, we got those parts, but it also needs to be understandable for people. Not everybody has the same education, or maybe they have a mental illness or a deficit or whatever. So it needs to be clear for everybody, and this is a part of that. We mess up forms a lot still, almost 50%. And that's all about missing input labels. So people get an input field, but don't have an idea what's it for, or we're using it wrong. So please don't do this. Just have an input with a placeholder of email. Because placeholder is usually light gray on a white background, and when you start typing, you have no idea what's there anymore. So just use a proper label for that. Also a placeholder for this, like enter a date of birth. And I'm not sure if you can see it in the back, but it's really light gray. It should be day, month, year. Well, if I start typing, was it month, day? Was it year? You have no idea anymore. It's hard to read because of the lightness, and it's hard to remember, right? If you're typing, it's like, I don't know anymore, and just clear it out and go back again. Why not just do this? Make it more easier for people to enter this. Yeah. We like to use custom radio buttons, right? But we have to make sure that's accessible as well. I have 3 images here, happy, meh, and sad. For us, it's pretty clear what it means. But if you're using a screen reader, you don't have any idea. So let's do this. You see, it's still an input type radio. And it has a label that refers to that image. But on the emoji, I've set an area hidden of true. So that means that the screen reader will not read out what that emoji is. In different screen readers, I've heard really weird ways of pronouncing an emoji. So if you use area hidden here, it's not mentioned. But for the screen readers, we add happy, angry, and sad here with that screen reader only class that I showed you earlier. So for screen readers, it will be read out as happy, angry, and sad. And for sighted users, you just see the emojis. I did some styling here. But the most important thing is on the top, I made sure that the input is not visible. It's still there, but it's not visible, because otherwise you have a radio button inside of your nice image button. And it will sound like this.
Happy, selected, radio button, 1 of 3. Angry, selected, radio button, 2 of 3. Sad, selected, radio button, 3 of 3.
So you still have your fancy, beautiful radio buttons, but it's also really useful for screen readers. Since HTML5, we have different kind of input types as well. That's really useful if you use it on a mobile phone, for instance. So input type email, nice, you get the @ sign and the dot, and usually you get extra things like .com and .net or whatever you can add there. If you're using, if you want to input the numbers, it's getting more interesting, because this is the default for instance, on iOS, this is the default number input. That's okay, but it's not only numbers, right? But it gets interesting on desktop browser or on your laptop. This is shown, it's like these little weird arrows. And I've seen users trying to go from 0 to 100 by just clicking those little damn arrows. And that's not really nice. So if you have input type number on mobile, you have a suboptimal keyboard, you have those confusing arrows on desktop, and also across browsers, it's inconsistent. Sometimes you have those arrows, sometimes you don't, and it's very, very weird. You could think of maybe using input type tel, so you get a telephone input types, and on the desktop it's just an input. It's no arrows anymore. errors anymore. Arrows, sorry, not errors, arrows. Talking about errors, what? Why is this not valid? I don't know. Maybe it's not valid in the US, maybe it's not valid here in Australia. Well, it's not valid in the Netherlands as well, because if this is a mobile number, it will start with 06. But this isn't helpful, right? I don't know what's wrong here. Maybe you should do this. Oh, you didn't validate the number, if it's okay. You saw a dash in there that you don't like. Well, maybe you should say, well, only enter digits. Or maybe just remove it yourself if it's not a number. If people enter weird characters or letters or something, just leave it out. We were all very, very happy when HTML5 form validation was there, because the browsers will show you errors themselves. If you use, for instance, regular expressions in your input types, or you could say, well, this is required. It would show, for instance, please fill in this field for a required field. And you can see below that it needs to be at least 2 characters. Fun, great. But you can also see the problem with this. These are 3 different browsers, 3 different ways of implementing the error messages. Especially the last one, I don't remember which browser it is, but my system is set to English, but I still get Dutch errors. So that's not really helpful as well. And what about your friendly designer saying, well, that's not how I designed it, right? So it is great, it's there, but it's not great to use. But there's a way of still using that internal way of validation that's done by the browser, but don't show this. That's using the constraint validation API. That's the same thing that the browser is using to do this, and we can make use of that. I have an example of that as well. I don't show the code here, but what it essentially does is, if I submit this form.
There are 3 errors found in the information you submitted. 1. Name is required. 2. Country can only contain letters. 3. Email format is incorrect.
So what I did is that I set the name to required. And the country that it only should be letters, and the last one is input type email. And I think no, I don't have code. Sorry, I removed it, that's true.
There are 3 errors found in the information you submitted. 1. Name is required. 2. Country can only contain letters. 3. Email format is incorrect.
And what I also did is make sure that if you get an error, you show a summary on top with links that, if you click on it, it's referred to the input itself. So if I click on email format is incorrect, you will shift to email input. What you essentially do is listen to specific things that can go wrong, that are defined in the input types, and just build an array of errors. And please, please, please always validate on the server as well. But I don't need to remind you, right? Hopefully. I see some smiles like, oh, we might need to do that. All right. Legibility is also a thing. Because, as I said earlier, if maybe people with minimal education, or especially dyslexia, or have some disabilities that make it hard for them to read, well, let's help them. This is not that much about code, but also about how to express our things on our websites or applications. So don't use fancy words or metaphors that only are known here in Australia, for instance, if you're internationally working, because it doesn't make sense. Maybe it doesn't even make sense for people that are not from Australia, but it makes even lesser sense for people that have no idea what's going on. Also, keep sentences short. Short enough? Use positive sentences as well, and active language. So try to involve people and not make it all don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that, because that doesn't click their mind. Personally, during the whole COVID situation, if I go to a website saying, well, what are the regulations if I want to go to Australia, for instance, you would first see all the negative things, don't, no, no. But if you're vaccinated, then it's good, right? Please switch that. First start with the positive, and then do the negative, if you need to do it. Also, use a font that's easy to read. Serif fonts are pretty hard to read. They look nice, but they're not that easy to read, especially if you put it closer together. Don't do that either. Okay. One thing I don't see used enough is using the language attribute, not only on your top HTML element, but also, for instance, if you're using quotes or whatever. On the top million, it's still 22%, so it's quite a lot still. And it's not that hard to use. For instance, on your HTML element, you said language, in this case, is English. Screen readers now know what kind of interpreter they need to use and to pronounce it correctly. And also for search engines, it's really helpful to know in what language this page is. Let's look at this example. It's a quote from Abbé Pierre. A smile costs less than electricity, but gives as much light. I really like this one. I'm not going to pronounce it in French. I let the screen reader do that without saying this is French.
Un sourire coûte moins cher que l'électricité, mais donne autant de lumière.
Yeah, thank you. It sounds like, I don't know what it sounds like. It should sound like this. If I set the language attribute to French here, then you get the...
Un sourire coûte moins cher que l'électricité, mais donne autant de lumière.
That's much nicer, right? I only know to say that I want to go to the bathroom in French, so I'm not gonna pronounce this, but this makes it way better to understand, and it feels better as well, right? Listen, the language is nicer. And especially if you go to Arabic. If you set it to Arabic, and I like this quote as well, so keep up the hard work if you want to reach success. If I set it to Arabic, it will know that it needs to pronounce it like Arabic.
من طلب العلا سهر الليالي.
It's almost like singing, I like this one. But the thing is, if I set the language attribute here as Arabic as well, I can do things in my CSS. I grab a nice Arabic font, like Cairo in this case. And the fun part is that I can also move to the lang attribute in this pseudo element and say, well, the direction is now right to left. So you set it, with just setting the language attribute, it's easy for you to set stuff. What we are using it for instance, is for internationalization. So we are using view, and we set the language attribute on the HTML. In this case, it's German. And what we can do now is the most important thing, is that we look at the document language, and based on that language, we can either select the language we have. So we have JSON files saying import D from D.json, and the language we have are English and German. So the language I'm trying to get from the HTML, and we put it into locale German, DE. If it's not there, it's fine. It will use the fallback to English. But if it's there, your application is available in that language. So very simple, but very powerful attribute. All right, to finish off, I want to share some other things that make the web a little better, a little cozier for everybody as well, not only people with disabilities. Reduced motion is one of them. if you have a motion disorder, or you have, like, I can't deal with this because I'm tired or whatever, we can do something about it. Let's look at this example from Apple. And if you are perceptive to these kinds of things, just maybe close your eyes a little bit. Because if I go to the Apple website, they promote their AirPods in quite an intrusive way. But what I can do is go to my settings, go to accessibility, display, and click reduce motion. Refresh the page, and now you can see, well, Apple agrees with me that I want less motion and just displays an image there for me. So that's really nice to do. Because, for instance, I created this example to get you crazy. Oh, let's jump around a little bit. Right, that's really annoying. Well, we can stop that, of course, as well, saying, well, display, reduce motion. And I did something different here. You can see that the first heading, if I refresh, first heading just fades in. But the second one, the H2, just doesn't do anything. So you can, this is the animation I had, the bouncing one. I can either say, well, if a user setting prefers reduce motion is set to reduce, I only fade. But you can also say, well, don't do any animation. It's up to you. Little animations are usually fine, but if it's some big thing like Apple does, well, just show an image or whatever. Don't do the animation. This example is also available. Is it well supported? Oh yes, it is. Well, as I said, IE11 is officially dead. Opera Mini, I don't know who uses that. And the other ones are just, yeah, some exotic ones, actually. So use this to your advantage. I'm a big lover of dark mode, but I want to make sure that I can choose whether I want to use dark mode or not. For instance, I usually wake up pretty early in the weekends, and my girlfriend's still sleeping next to me, but I want to code, right? That's what I want to do. So I set my editor to dark mode, and then I need to look something up on a website, and it's like, big flash of white light in your face. And then I usually get like something like, sorry. So let's see how we can do it. Do this. Well, there's a preferred color scheme setting for that, and it will detect if the user prefers light or dark, of course. You can indicate this by setting that in your preferences. You saw me doing it on Mac, but Windows has the same, just on a little bit different location. But you can also set it in your browser, by the way. So if you set it default in your browser, it will override your system setting. So in this example, this is the minimal version. So if I switch here to light, then immediately my system is set to white, so you can see the browser, Chrome is in white. And also the background, but now I can set it here to dark. Go back there, and now you see the background is dark again, but my browser itself is still light. So depending on what you want to do, for yourself, you can set it in your browser settings as well if you prefer dark always, because it will override the system one. So this is the easy way to do it. We are setting some variables, some custom properties, light and dark. Normally we say, well, background is light and the color is dark. Usually that's the basis of websites. And if preferred color scheme is dark, then we just switch it. You can do the same with images. You can set the invert of an image is not always that pretty, but you can try that out. But still keep in mind that what looks nice on the light mode, but when you switch to dark, it could be a little bit too intense, for instance, or not enough contrast in that way. So play around with those values as well. This is a more elaborate way of doing it, because the other one is when I visit the website again, it will look at my settings again. But in this case, I can toggle it myself, and it will save the settings into my local storage. So the next time I come to this website, it still reminds my settings. So if we set this now to light, then you can see the browser changes, but the inside of the website doesn't, because it's relying on this one, the theme that is in my local storage. So I've set it to dark, I switch it to light again, and you can see the theme is light. If now set it to dark, I can refresh whatever I want, but the website still continues to be light, because that's in my local storage. And that's what's being used all over again. The way I'm doing it is that I'm putting a class on the body tag. So usually I have, again, two colors. I set it to my body tag, but with that switch, if I hit that button, I'm adding an extra class to the body, saying this is dark. So then I'm using different colors. This code is also on GitHub. This is essentially the JavaScript we need to do there. So we listen to the toggle, and then we set the value of that toggle to either dark or light. And when it's loaded, we just look at the first we look at the local storage. If it's not there, then we still use the system one or the browser one you set. Is it well supported? Yeah, same as the previous one. Finally, reduce data. I just came here to Australia this morning. I was looking in my phone like, all right, if I want roaming, what will it cost me? Well, you can probably get an idea, right? I think I get 500 megabytes for about 50 euros. So that's about 45 Australian dollars or something. Well, go to Facebook and it's done, probably. So what we can do is limit the data we're sending over the wire to the user. Or maybe you're in a rural area with slow connections. Then we can also make use of that setting. So for instance, what could we do? If a user, for instance, prefers reduced data set to no preference. So I don't care, I'm on a great Wi-Fi connection, or I have 4G, LTS, or whatever. We send that enormous fancy font to the user. You know, from CSS it's loaded to the device, and then in the body we say, well, we're using that fancy font. However, if the user has said that it wants reduced data, that font will not be loaded in the first place. It will not be downloaded. And then the body will parse the font family, say, well, fancy font, what's that? I don't have that on my system, so I just move on to Arial, which is usually there by default. Another way is saying, well, I'm setting the background to a particular color for everybody, and only if your settings are no preference, and that's essentially the default, then I'm throwing in a nice background there as well. So that's another way of doing stuff. However, this looks pretty grim, right? All red. It's experimental, it's behind flags, but it's coming, it's definitely coming. But it will be great to use for the situation I mentioned. But there's a way of doing this. You can still use some JavaScript for Chromium browsers on Android, for instance. Because on Android you can say, well, I want to reduce my data use. And you look if that save data is set to true, and then you do some other stuff by loading smaller chunks, for instance. And the last one is what I like to say, death to bullshit. If you're doing this, I will look for you. I will find you, and I will kill you. still I see too many websites being like this. No, I'm a racist, sure. Please, for the love of God, don't like us, but keep your website simple and infinite scrolling. Do you like it? I so much hate it, especially with these kind of weird stuff that's going on. So please be a good developer and think of it like you might want to use the website yourself as well. I want to finish off with a quote from a friend of mine who says, when it comes to accessibility, I rather see imperfect than indifferent. Please do what you can. It doesn't have to be perfect at the start, but just take little steps and make sure you're doing the right thing for you and maybe for your future self as well. I want to say cheers. The slides are there. The video will be there in a few weeks as well, and all the links to GitHub are there. We have some time left for questions if anybody has questions. Otherwise, I'm around at the conference as well, of course. No burning questions? Well, find me later on. That's fine. Great to be here, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.